As your mayor, I have continued to listen, to learn, and to lead, and these budget summits go hand in hand with my style of management. My view of a budget is that it's a set of priorities. Those priorities are determined by our collective values and our vision for the city of St. Petersburg. Now, earlier this month, we unveiled our vision for the city, which, there we go. St. Petersburg will be a city of opportunity where the sun shines on all who come to live, work, and play. We will be an innovative, creative, and competitive community that respects our past while honoring our future and pursuing our future. We have embarked upon applying this vision to our budgeting process, and I am certain that the FY15 budget will reflect our priorities. We will support neighborhoods as thriving neighborhoods equate to a thriving city. We will improve the housing stock within our city. We will focus on economic development in Midtown and all across the city. We will market our city through additional channels to attract businesses to our city, to increase tourism, and to supplement our economic development strategies. I heard many of these issues last year when I attended these budget summits, and I agree with those issues. So I plan on working to see that they are in our budget to reflect those priorities. As our city's revenues continue to recover, though, we must be mindful that the city, like you and your family, must live within our means. As such, as we progress through the budget development process, we're going to have to make some difficult decisions. Tonight, I look forward to hearing your comments, but before I do, I've asked Tom Green and the budget team to utilize these budget summits as an opportunity to increase the transparency of our budgeting process and to spend a few minutes discussing the budgeting process in lay terms, not in budget lingo. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Green. And thank you all again for coming tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay. Good evening, and thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before we get started, a couple of items. Our deputy mayor came in while the mayor was speaking, so Kanika Tomlin, Dr. Kanika Tomlin, deputy mayor, is here. I always run the risk doing this, but I'll introduce a couple of our administrators who are here. Sherry McBee, our Parks, Leisure and Community Services Administrator is here. Chief Dave DeKay, interim police chief, is here. Any other administrator that I'm missing? Muslim, our chief information officer, is here. And I want to particularly thank Tom Skirchek for his setting up of our facility here this evening, so I appreciate that. A couple of more housekeeping items. You should have gotten an agenda and also future opportunities for your input in the budget process. We certainly appreciate your attendance tonight. As the mayor mentioned, very early on in our initial discussions about the budget, the mayor mentioned to me, I attended these summits. I think we're missing an opportunity to really spend some time and educate and kind of distill some complicated budgetary items that we discussed, and candidly, we in the budget office are, well versed in, and it's second nature to us. But some of these concepts can be challenging to follow. So what we've done tonight is, and Angela, if you could advance the slide, please. We're going to endeavor to use these three budget summits to talk about some issues that we hear a lot from citizens. First and foremost, tonight we're going to talk about what is a budget and why do we use so many funds. I mean, it's a little bit confusing when we have a lot of different funds going on. At the next summit, we're going to talk about our reserves and when they should be used, how they can be used, the impact of using them, and so forth. And then at the third summit, we're going to really focus in on the general fund and understanding when we talk about our budget, what we're referring to. So without further ado, what is a budget? I mean, a budget can be a lot of different things. For we in the budget department, it certainly is looking at a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of numbers on a spreadsheet, but it's a lot more than that. It's a vision plan. It's a planning document. It can be, certainly it is an itemization of cash flows coming in and then expenditures going out. It's also a very dynamic process through which we establish funding priorities, and it's an allocation of scarce resources. Additionally, a budget is a management document. We can track how we're proceeding or progressing in our annual spending plan. In fact, we, on a quarterly basis, report to Council and to the Budget and Finance and Taxation Committee of Council how we're doing each quarter as we progress. Having said that, budgeting is also a little bit of an art. We have to use projections. We have to look at how things, how revenues performed in the past to project how they're going to perform in the future. We also look at spending patterns. You know, there certainly, for example, in Parks and Rec, their expenses increase over the summer when we provide our summer programs for the youth. So there are definitely spending patterns and revenue patterns that we have to take into consideration in managing our budget. Additionally, our budget is governed by a lot of different forces. We've got the state statutes that require us to, hold 2 public hearings. We've got our city charter that requires the mayor to submit a budget to council by July 1. And we also have other city codes. So our process is it's dictated by a lot of different forces, and it's sometimes can be a complex process. But again, it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a planning tool and a very important process that we've embarked upon. Now, the next question is, why are there so many funds? The city and governmental entities at all levels use a lot of different funds. And in fact, we're governed by general accounting principles. It's called fund accounting. So we have broken our budget is segmented into various different funds. It's not too dissimilar from in our private finances. You're having different funds or different accounts. For example, you have checking accounts, you have savings accounts, you might have a retirement fund, you might have college savings. You might have, mortgage, car loan. So there are various and different funds that we all operate in within our own private finances, and that's the same with the city. I guess the city has a few more zeros in those accounts than I have in my personal account, to be sure. But it's not too dissimilar from the way we operate our finances. So next slide, please. Why are there so many funds? Well, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers and the ratepayers. And there's a distinction there that I want to make sure that is understood, is taxpayers and ratepayers are not always universally the same. For example, we might have a customer of the golf course who drives up over from Manatee County and plays golf at Mangrove Bay. Well, that person is a ratepayer, but they're not a resident, so they're not a taxpayer. Or with our Water Resources Department, we may have a neighboring community that is a customer, a ratepayer of our wastewater service or wastewater services. They are a ratepayer to the wastewater system, but they are not a taxpayer within the city. So there are different fiduciary responsibilities within our funds, and we separate those funds so that we can track the source of those revenues and also track and account for the cost of providing those services. And what types of funds do we use? We have 4 different broad categories of types of funds. We use what's called governmental funds, which include the general fund, our capital improvement funds. We have proprietary funds, and within the proprietary funds we have enterprise funds and internal service funds. And then we have fiduciary funds, which are like our pension programs. And then we have loans and advances. And tonight what I'm going to try to do is talk about the difference between the general fund and an enterprise fund. So quickly on the general fund, it's most similar to your checking account. It's our main operating account for the city. Your tax revenues come into the general fund, so your property tax revenues are collected in that fund. And typically when you hear a story in the newspaper or read a story in the newspaper, hear on the radio or on TV about the city's budget, or they're typically referring to the general fund budget. And what are the services that are provided within our general fund? It's usually the core services of public safety, police and fire protection, parks and recs, parks and recreation, libraries, codes, economic development, neighborhood type services. Those are the core services of the government, and they're provided through our general fund. Now, our next is, what is an enterprise fund? An enterprise fund is a self-supporting business that is basically owned by the city. So our examples would be our water resources department, sanitation, our parking fund, stormwater, and all of the revenues received from this fund, or received in this fund, are used to support the operations of providing that service. And so user fees cover those costs. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what are the revenues used to cover. Covers all the wages, salary, and benefits of the employees of that entity or that enterprise. It covers debt service payments. Our water resources department is pretty capital intensive. We've got to maintain all the water and sewer system. We're working on some good projects in the future that will reduce our operating costs within that enterprise. But it's very capital intensive, so they borrow money, and the rates that we pay support the operation of that business, as well as pay for bonds issued to improve that service.